This time I'm going to show you how to make this really sweet little pin cushion, which looks an awful lot more complicated than it is, because you would imagine I've painstakingly sewn together all of these tiny little squares and taken my time to match up all of the points. But I've got a trick to show you which makes this very simple and very achievable, even for a beginner sewer. So I've got a seam down the back which is hand sewn closed. It's stuffed tightly with toy filler. I'm using 4 different types of fabric, and I'm going to leave you the fabric requirements and the cutting instructions in the description box underneath the video. It really doesn't take an awful lot of fabric, and it really doesn't take an awful lot of time. So let's go and make it. This is a quilter's grid which is printed with 1-inch squares, and the rougher side is adhesive and the smoother side isn't. So your fabric actually sticks to this side when you iron over it. Do make sure that you iron the pieces to the right side, otherwise they're just not going to stick and this will end up being stuck to your ironing board. So I'm going to use 4 different prints of fabric. I've already cut them into 1-inch strips. And then I'm going to use my little ruler and cut these again into 1-inch squares. So it's actually quite quick to do when you do it this way. So just lining up the 1-inch mark on my ruler and cutting the little strips. And with 4 prints, you're going to need 16 of each of these little squares. And I'm cutting 2 at a time there. When you've cut out all of your squares, place them, might be easy to do that on top of your ironing board, and we're going to place these over the squares on the grid. And what I like to do is to avoid having 2 prints both the same right next to each other. So if you lay it all out carefully like this before ironing, that means that if you do get to the end of filling in all of the boxes and you see that you do have 2 prints the same next to each other, it's not too late that you can't just kind of move them around. So I'm lining up, or trying to butt up the edges together, but don't worry too much if they overlap slightly or you've got a slight gap. So you don't have to be 100% perfect with these, as long as it's only slight, because every one of these lines is going to go within your seam allowance. So carry on until the whole of the area is finished. Oh, and by the way, this is 8 inches square. So my quilter's grid has 8 pieces, 8 squares down each side. And we need to fill in every one of those with a fabric square. And when those are all arranged, take a hot iron, as hot as your fabric will cope with, and press down. And again, don't worry if these don't match up perfectly, they will do when they're actually sewn. Some of your quilter's grids like steam. This one is better without steam, but you may have to hold the iron though for a while just to make sure everything sticks. These little irons are perfect, they do get very hot. And then I'm going to turn it over and just do the same from this side as well, just to make sure that they're well and truly stuck down on every one of the squares. And then we're going to sew. So you can see how, because we've got the edges of the squares, these folds automatically happen over the edges of the squares. So we're going to fold each one and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance down each one of those lines, and just make sure that the line is right on the end. It wants to sit with the line right on the end, but that's where we need it to be. So if you've got a 1/4 inch foot on your sewing machine, that would be a good time to use it now. Otherwise, you probably know whereabouts on your presser foot the 1/4 inch line is, and just sew. So when I turn it over, you can see I've got a nice neat seam, and all of those points are going to match perfectly. So let's go all the way across. So let's do the next line. So go and fold it, encourage that crease to sit right on the end, and sew. And we're going to do the same with all of these lines, all in one direction to start with. So just keep going all the way across your fabric. Take your time, fold it, crease it, and sew it. When we've sewn all across, I'm going to press this. So first of all from the wrong side, so I can make all of those seams go in the same direction. A little bit of steam may help here, and I'm just pulling it open so the seams are nice and flat. And then let's iron from the front side. I'm just going to use a little bit of best press on this because it's curling a little bit at the edges and I don't want it to. So just a quick mist, and that should help it lay flatter. And then just like before, we're going to allow the crease to form over the edge of the squares. And this time, again, sew straight down the edge with your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're a little bit lumpy now because we're going over the folds, but your machine will cope with that, it's not too thick. So again, just fold down the line, move the other fabric that I've just sewn out of the way, and we'll go all the way across in the same way. And you can see how much this has shrunk down by now, so it's half the size that it was before. So we started off with an 8-inch square and we've ended up with just over a 4-inch square. So again, let's press this out. And I will trim it down slightly just to make it perfectly square in just a second. Again, it's wanting to curl, so I'm just going to give it a quick spray on both sides actually to help to keep it flat. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat, but it's going to help you to see what I'm doing if it is. Okay, that'll do. So let's open this up again. And I just want to trim the very edges, just so I know that they are perfectly square. Let's go a little bit bigger than that. So there's a lot of seams going on here, so they can kind of twist a little bit. So I'm not trimming back too much because I'm still going to have a seam allowance around the edge here, but just enough to make it nice and neat. There you can go, see that one actually twisted quite a lot. There. And then I'll make up the back. Now the back I'm going to use in 2 different colours of the same fabric. So I haven't actually cut this yet. And I'm going to have a seam down the centre. So let's just take 1 layer of the fabric. I'm going to cut it a little bit bigger for now. So I'm 4.5 inches square. So I'm going to cut a strip 5 inches for now by 4.5. Let's do 5 by 3. And again, we can trim this down to exactly the same size when we put the two pieces together. You could do this in one colour fabric. I just thought it might be fun to do two. Or you could do more than that if you wish. So let's just chop off that selvage and cut my 5x3. Again, this will be too big, I know that. So this is going to be straight down the centre back of my pincushion. So I'm going to sew them right sides together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to leave a gap here so I can turn the pincushion the right side out. So just a little gap of a couple of inches or 5 centimetres or so, just in the centre there. Then I'll take the iron again and I'm just going to press the seam open. You could finger press that if you're using cotton, that should be fine. And then this is going to go right sides together with the front of my pincushion. Line that up over the centre. I'll put a couple of pins in there just to hold it together while I sew and help to keep it flat because it really does want to curl. Then I'm going to sew all the way around the edge, again with my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So stop with your needle down when you get to the corner and carry on sewing. Back down the third side. And then the final side here. And out come the pins. And I can trim off the excess fabric. You could use your rotary cutter for this if you wish. And I'm going to snip across the points as well. Oops. Just to make those a little bit less bulky and the whole thing a little bit more pointy. Right, so let's turn this the right side out and then we'll start to stuff it. So to push out the corners, I'm going to use a turning tool, not the end of your scissors, please. Don't want to make holes in the fabric, and just gently push those points out. Looking good. And then I'm going to stuff quite tightly with toy filler. I think that might be a little bit too much, but let's see how we go. Nope, that's looking good. I want it to be nice and round and fat. So we're still going with more. One little bit more, and I think that's enough. There, nice fat pincushion. Then we just need to sew the opening closed. So I'm taking my needle and thread, coming up through the inside of the gap, and I'm doing a ladder stitch, so it might be easier to actually kind of force the closure, the opening closed, sorry, as you're sewing. So I'm just picking up one side of the fabric, come across to the opposite side and pick up a little stitch there. The smaller you can make these stitches, the more invisible they're going to be and the stronger that seam will be. So just go along for 1.5 centimetres or around about 1/2 inch or something like that, and just keep doing a few stitches like this and then pull to close. It's really satisfying. I think it's my favourite hand stitch as a ladder stitch. So again, in one side, out through the other, and in this side, out of the other, and then I'm going to hold it together and pull the threads to close it, and we'll do this all the way across the opening. And there's my pincushion finished. Now there's no reason why you couldn't make the back the same as the front. That would be quite cute. Not very often you're going to use the back of it though, so I tend to keep the busier side of it, if you will, to the top side. But it's a nice handy size as well. Of course, you've got to see if it works. And it's a perfect size to fit your pins, to fit your needles, to fit your safety pins. And it's quite a quick make, and I think it's one of those things that you're going to be making quite a few of these. And what a nice little gift idea that's going to make as well. If you wanted to, you could not make the pincushion from it at all, but instead maybe not put quite so much toy filler in there, and drop a little bit of your favourite essence or dried lavender or something like that, and you could even put a little hanging loop in one side as well, so you've got a lovely little lavender pouch, which actually this fabric, this is the Lewis and Irene Bluebell would suit absolutely perfectly because it's predominantly lilac. So I hope you enjoyed making it. I just think it's a way of creating something that looks incredibly complicated. You know, if you're going to give this as a gift, somebody's going to be thinking, oh, how long did it take you to sew together all those tiny little squares of fabric? But you can see when you know how, there are some very easy and quick tips to be able to give you patchwork squares which are about 1/2 inch square with perfect points in between each one. So use the technique on other projects as well. No reason why you can't make a huge one and make it into a bag, or of course you could use bigger squares. If you used a 2-inch grid or 2-inch squares on your 1-inch grid, then you're going to end up with a larger project than this one as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you make lots. I shall see you again very soon. Bye bye.